like to welcome each and all our participants who joined us today for the panel discussion around professionalization in adult and university lifelong learning, because I think there is an important situation right now today that we shall have to have a good look about some perspectives of professionalization. What is the message of today regarding the topic? And this is what I would like to share with you through some points. One topic that I would like to share with you and discuss with you, and I await for your reflections and comments, questions that we might want to reflect to, is that what kind of choices and limitations we may have regarding professionalization in adult education or the professional development of adult educators as such. This would be the first topic that we would like to share some good thoughts about. The second is what could be the role or roles and responsibilities for universities in the development of adult and lifelong learning. The third issue, who could be potential partners of universities in the promotion of professionalization in adult and lifelong learning? And finally, how can we bridge in between the world of work, which is a very strong factor, and the non-vocational, the non-employment oriented development of professionalization of adult educators. So there is a very important aspect of the same issue from the world of economies, but also from social and environmental aspects as well. So these are the 4 topics I would like to propose. And we can have anything else open-ended. If there is anything that you may want to get responded to, you can also propose anything that might be seriously important. You may consider it should be addressed today. Okay, so let me just turn back to the first question. What are the choices and the limitations of professionalization in adult education, of professional development of adult educators? How do you see this field? Anyone to start or to reflect? And very welcome, Brikena, indeed. I was just very much engaged with listing up the topics for today. Very welcome. What is your impression about the matter of professionalization in adult education? How do you see the choices of the field? Aleksandra, what do you see from the point of view of the EAEA?
I think it's an interesting thing, because we just finished a project in which EAEA was a partner that was very much about preparing adult educators for the digital world. So that was the main topic of it, and it fit in quite. I think it's quite a timely topic, even though the project started just before the pandemic. And but we also during the project actually reflected on what opportunities for professionalization there are, and it seems that there are quite a lot, especially when it comes to online learning. So of course we have EPALE, which is a platform where people can share resources, where organizations upload MOOCs, or where we have discussions, and that's really, I think, professionalization also as peer learning. That element, I think, is currently quite strong. I think there are countries where the approach, I think, is quite systemic. So, for example, Switzerland or Austria, where in-service training or entry-level training is really systemic, and you have an institution who's actually responsible for that, and where you have a bit of a quality assurance in that respect. And I think in terms of opportunities and what's What's also important for us as a European organizations, of course, is a European umbrella of adult education providers in non-formal adult learning. We also see stronger role gradually of the Erasmus Plus program. Some of the things that we were advocating for in terms of professionalization that are now visible. For example, for years we've been talking about how difficult it is for small organizations to join European partnerships because or even mobility projects, because it requires a lot of effort to actually conceptualize a project, to write it. You need certain skills for that, and we're very happy to see that that since this year it's possible also to apply for small scale partnerships. So I think there are a number of opportunities and some limitations as well, but I guess we'll get to that later.
Anything to add to this from other points? Brikena, what do you think from the lifelong learning platform? If it is the topic of professionalization, professional development, and I don't know, I am concerned that it goes along with the quality concerns of your platform. What choices do you see for professionalization to further develop, or do you see more limitations than choices?
I think, yeah. Well, there are, of course, many opportunities, and Aleksandra mentioned some of them. And I think there is a great attention given at the moment to professionalization and educators training, which we can definitely use to further work on this. And I think it's not only the Erasmus Plus, but also the recovery and resilience plans. We're screening at the moment the national plans, but to some extent, we know that this has been also among the priorities that some of the member states have addressed as well. So I think there are lots of opportunities for obviously professionalization, but I mean, I do see also a lot of limitations at the same time. And we all know the difficulties that in particular adult education faces on the one side, because it falls under different ministries and policy areas, and therefore difficult to tailor services or support to their needs. But it also is a smaller sector, it's a more fragmented sector, it's a very difficult to reach target, a very difficult to motivate targets, that has preconditions to access learning that are also very difficult. So I think there are lots of limitations, but I truly believe on the one of the things that the lifelong learning platform tries to work on is really how can we support each other? So how can different sectors work together to reinforce the opportunities that this particular sector can have, or others as well. So I think it's also, we believe in this cross-sectoral cooperation in education and training, and that goes in line with the role of universities.
Yeah, there are some questions about whether universities are ready, or are they capable of entering into valuable cooperation beyond discipline-focused activities. Any reflection to this? Back to the first question from our presenters, Paula, Carmel, and Elisa. Do you have anything to add to this? What kind of choices and limitations you may see to the field of professional development, professionalization in education in broader aspects, and more precisely in the world of adult learning and education? And also the floor is yours, Heribert, as well. So if you want to reflect to the first question.
Well, of course, if Paula wants, it's her chance.
Well, thank you.
Ladies first, sorry.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I had the chance to say here on Wednesday that this is an important topic, although it's not still clear for me what are the the frame of the topic, because, well, this issue of professionalization has been dealt in very different ways. But I think it is important to think of what adult educators are doing on one hand, on the work that they are achieving, and if this work is a place for thinking about what it is done, what is adult education, and also about, I think it's important also to think about the educational path that adult educators have to follow before or while they are doing their job as adult educators. Why that? Well, I think there is the risk of having a job, of having people working in a field without having no clear ideas of what they are doing, in the sense that they do not reflect critically on what they are doing. Adult education has several streams, is important for developing skills and knowledge for adult learners in the labor market, but there are other streams, there are other areas of intervention that adult educators are important, from social movements to liberal adult education, non-formal adult education. And I think it is important, this is, I guess, the role of higher education institutions, not only higher education institutions, but this is the role, one of the roles of higher education institutions is to support these thinking, helping these adult educators to think about what they are doing and how are they doing it. So I see many people becoming adult educators without having an idea of what adult education is and what adult education was and how to do adult education. And I think higher education institutions have a role here to develop this critical thinking. Thank you.
Yeah, this is very important. I think this is also sometimes a necessity that higher education institutions and representatives of universities have a clear picture about adult education, not just from the point of view discipline, but also from practice. And I think it may require and may presume a certain level of knowledge and experience with those people who could work in the field as distinguished practitioners. And I think there are a number of ways, institutional, organizational, how it may develop. But sometimes one may have a feeling from the world of higher education that the connections are not necessarily working well for a number of reasons. Sometimes it is underestimated, sometimes it is overestimated, sometimes it is exaggerated, sometimes it is forming. In another country, there are examples of deformation of the field. How do you see, Heribert?
Well, let me take the opportunity for a little bit deeper reflection for the moment. Let us jump back about 50 years,
right,
when we had a similar world crisis in everything. We just had the end of the Vietnam War. We had all the students' rebellions at the universities. We had the first oil crisis. We had the crisis in the social institutions and whatever. And that was the time when we had, at least for us in Germany, two very, very important reports. One was by Coombs on the world educational crisis, and the other one was on Georg Picht, which he called the Bildungskatastrophe. So the catastrophe in the education sector. That was the time which I may want to call was the first wave of what we are discussing now as professionalization. That was the time when we had, you know, that I always like to speak of triangles. We had this development in the golden triangle of policy, legislation, and financing. Yeah, we had the first laws in Germany on adult education in the different Länder as a federal republic. And at the same time, that was the time where all that was used to develop institutions, the folk high schools, definitely being one of the most important ones throughout Germany, which is even today an institution which has more than 9 million participants per year. So you can think what kind of level of institutionalization you need and what kind, because it's people working in there full-time, part-time, and it is the training and the retraining of those working there. So there's a high level of professionalization. Today, we are somewhere in the second, third, or whatever wave of professionalization, where in addition to the professionalization and the institutionalization, I see a big issue which was mentioned already, the digitalization. So it may be a new golden triangle we have to think of, because the digitalization will change the institutional setup completely. And those professionals working in the institutions will have to learn tremendously in order to cope with their world of work as adult educators. So it is an issue for the universities, let's call it in the first cycle of learning, or for UCEN and others, for the second or third. What can the universities do for those who are already working in the field of adult education, and how can they support them in their training and retraining, especially in those areas combining in a very different mode than earlier with all the distance teaching and whatever, when the whole thing is more or less in a digital mode. So I would like to reflect on this a little bit deeper, that our issue of professionalization has strong linkages to the issue of institutionalization, and of course all that is based and hijacked by digitalization.
Thank you very much, Heribert. I think this is very important what you have just mentioned, and I think if we are shortly connected to the example what was mentioned by Elise, this is something very much interesting, how to connect with the realities of professionals making use of an academic environment, how to analyze, how to reflect, how to critically relate to some challenging aspects of quality learning and education. Elise, what do you think about what Heribert has just mentioned?
Yes, thank you very much for letting me talk. I was thinking all the time and just wanted to hear the discussion, because I already thought that we had very different topics on professionalization and adult learning this week. I think that's great. And my input was somewhat different, but it relates perfectly actually also to the discussion today. So I was thinking what Heribert HINZEN said about the institutionalization and professionalization, which I had with respect to my presentation yesterday, was the aspect when actually the studies of education were introduced. And this was some kind of institutionalization of education, actually, also in Germany, and led to professionalization as well. So there was the point where the discussions were linked somewhat. And I think from my point of view, as you mentioned, it's a very important aspect to think about how can you relate theory and practical experience in the process of professionalization. So what's the worth of actually studying something? And some points I heard already was the aspect of reflection, of critical reflection, self-reflection and reflection of knowledge, and of course of the environment. So the circumstances we are working in, the organizational context, contexts, and also the regulations. And I think that's a very critical aspect also for adult educators in special. So as we know, especially in Germany, we have some institutional contexts working well, such as the Volkshochschule, but on the other hand, we have contexts where working as an adult educator can be very difficult given the circumstances. And yeah, I think there are many topics related to my topic yesterday, and yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you. There are some hands indicated, so let me give the floor back to Aleksandra, then to Karma.
Yes, thank you. So many things that just came up, but yes, coming back to yeah, what was said before about digitalization, I think that's really a big concern. That's something that we hear a lot from our members. There is a lot of investment in that, definitely, but the question is always, where is this investment going and what is being funded? So we hear a lot about infrastructure being funded and tools. That's great, but I think sometimes the concern is if you invest in people, that's actually more likely to pay off, if we want to use these economic terms. So I think that's one of the things that we hear a lot from our members, and also what Elisa just said about the status of adult learning professionals. I think that's also a key issue. So many of them across Europe, not just in Germany. I remember hearing that when I was at the Adult Education Academy 2020, just before that was no longer possible to do it face-to-face. So yes, so many of them are working part-time or being self-employed, like I was just a few years ago. So if you have to worry about juggling so many different tasks, what would be your actual motivation or even time to take up professional opportunities? So I think it's a really big topic with a lot of systemic issues that come into it.
Thank you very much for the comment, indeed, and the examples related. Carmel?
Thank you. I just wanted to reflect on Paula's comments from today, because we were in the same panel, and it was actually in our panel because I approached from the cooperation of higher education institutions and adult educators, and I advocated for strengthening this cooperation. And also, as Heribert HINZEN just mentioned, that universities could do a lot, and especially here in the context of university lifelong learning, maybe more openness. And this is actually what I am advocating for, because in the interviews that I conducted with adult educators, they are ready to cooperate and to reach out to universities, but somehow this dialogue could be strengthened in a way, and this could finally lead to a more enhanced identity of the adult educator, as it was, I think, one of the main conclusions of our panel on Wednesday. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And I think this is also very important in the environment of higher education institutions, where we try to work with an enlarged community to make it work really on practical problems and matters and to be responsive. I think the lifelong learning platform is, and also collaborating with the AEA, has generated a much broader focus. This is also same, and I'm very thankful that Heribert is together with us, because DVV International also provided a good opportunity to include a number of professionals from different cultures, different practices from a number of countries, where they try to signal and resonate their own local and regional environmental aspects, which may heavily constrained their realities, their perspectives, regardless of the global. Sometimes you have to turn back to your local realities, how difficult it is to make things come true and come to a level than expected by learners whose learning habits have been changing very dramatically because of, for example, digitalization. And I really wanted to emphasize that there might be some questions about capacities of universities, how much we are aware of our responsibility in the field. Heribert, you have something to say.
Yeah, it's very close to the point I wanted to raise. If you look at the sheer quantity, then it's, if I take the case of Germany again, quite dramatic. There are about 200,000 part-timers in the local centers of the 4 high schools. So that is a quantity of potential participants, which is huge.
Yeah.
At the same time, you have to look into the diversity. They're teaching 10, 20, 30 different subjects on 4, 5, 6, 7 different levels. You know it from the European language framework and all the other areas. So the sheer diversity makes it always impossible for the universities to really react on this. So I think what is quite important, and somebody mentioned that it is the cooperation between the institutions which is so important. It is that the local centers themselves, if you take the big ones, if you take Munich for high schools alone, there are 250,000 participants, 250,000 in Munich. So they have a lot of further training efforts for their own staff. At the same time, they work with a number of the Munich universities. All of that is much more difficult with those smaller centers in the smaller cities or in the countryside.
Yeah, I think
you know that the DBV by now, they have the so-called VHS cloud, where all the 1,000 centers are members, and you can do the training courses and even the participation, your language courses via the cloud. So there are huge developments, which from my understanding, even, let's over-exaggerate a bit, are even overtaking the universities. I've been working at the different universities. So in Cologne, I have a different campus, and I have to work via CLIPS, or in Würzburg, we have the VU campus, or in others. Yeah, so it's an important sector that those universities should develop digital ways of working much more closely together than they're doing it now.
I do agree with you, and also I'm very happy that we have Clara Engels-Pereni with us from the Commission, and we just discussed about some new or old new perspectives of the new agenda on adult learning, that how far this, for example, will be articulated through, for example, microcredit programs, how far universities may be able to look beyond their traditional formulated curricula and to become flexibly, to be responsive to the learners' needs, like adult educators who want to develop their own skills, and also to turn in their professional experience into the development of programs for quality and benefits of adult learners. So I think this is something very much interesting. Brikena has something to say.
Well, I wanted to add something to the discussion that I think it's a very important. We're like you're trying to indeed we are trying to discuss here professionalization of the sector, but at the same time we are in a moment where we are also discussing what is an educator. And in the current social economic contexts, with the twin transitions, but also global other challenges, the role of an educator in itself is shifting, is changing. And at the same time, we are faced with a much more diverse adult learner population, which is much larger population than the youth one. So how can we address that diversity? How can we tailor this professionalization to that diversity is key. And I think we can't have solutions that are one size fits all type of solutions. And we need to also think what universities are ready to do already, while they also, of course, have a lot of work on themselves to adapt to this context. So I just wanted to bring this to the discussion because I think it's very important to bear this in mind, that the role of educators itself is changing. So are we ready to teach them?
Very true. And I think I would like to give the floor to John Talbot. Please.
Yeah, okay. Yes, I've listened to everything that's been said, and I just wanted to go back to something that you mentioned, Heribert, about 50 years ago in Germany. There was a review of adult education and things changed as a result of it. And I quite agree, we are at that point now. But I don't think we should begin by talking about learning. We should begin by talking about the way the world has changed. And it's not just changed in terms of technology. Most fundamentally for us in education is knowledge itself has changed. And I think we have to begin by recognizing that knowledge is much more distributed. We are no longer the gatekeepers of what is authoritative knowledge. That if we can't accommodate a change in the requirements for knowledge, people will simply go elsewhere. And that's exactly what's happening. You don't have to, I don't know if anybody likes to watch YouTube, but anything you want to learn about is on YouTube. And very often it will be introduced by someone who says, actually, I didn't learn much in school, but I've learned an awful lot more since I started watching YouTube. And here's the program that I put together because it interests me. And I think we are, when we talk about universities not being able to adapt, and we don't go any further than that, we don't address fundamental issues like the curriculum. And we still reserve for ourselves the exclusive right to determine what people should learn, what they should know about. We take unto ourselves as the only people who are qualified to determine what is legitimate knowledge. And I think unless and until we get over that and begin to see the world from the perspective of our learners and the world that they live in and the knowledge that's important to them, we will never move on. And what will happen is the world will move on without us. Yeah, so I think it's very important for us, instead of talking about generalities, you know, to be cognizant of the changes which have occurred and to think about, you know, we haven't changed. Our way of thinking about the curriculum hasn't changed in centuries. Yeah. We still say that we are the people who will decide what you will learn. We haven't found ways, we don't even think about what the needs of the learners are. We don't think how we can negotiate with them. We still persist with this very fixed 19th century industrial model, which is simply not fit for the 21st century. And I think it's about time that we really started to think much more like the rest of the world and less like academics, people who know what's best.
Yeah, I think it is something very much important. It just resonates also the thoughts of Peter Jarvis, who was calling us why we should change to lifelong learning. First of all, we have to understand what is learning, what is knowledge, what it is about, and what is our premier principle. What do we want to do? Thank you very much for this critical input. There was Heribert and then Paula.
I think what John said is actually what I wanted to introduce with this wider view on the digitalization processes, vice versa, the institutionalization. It's exactly what he was saying. When I have telephone conversations with my sons, they're around 40 and plus, regularly after our telephone conversations where we had a heated debate about anything, 5 minutes later, I have 2-3 links from YouTube, which they are sending, where they are explaining the world to me, yeah, how it is in the reality and how much of what and the way we are discussing it is what they call old knowledge. And definitely, if we are looking into this issue of institutionalization or rescuing our institutions against all what is happening through the digital world, I think we have to rethink and reflect how we are doing our adult learning and education in our institutions. Yeah, I think it's a very important process, and it's part of what we have discussed this week as professionalization. It's have to go about in organizational development of our institutions, in the teaching and learning processes. So it's part of the professionalization.
Thank you, Heribert. Paula?
Yes.
Then Aleksandra and Elise.
Yeah, thank you. I'm doing a reflection that is following what has been said about learning and other places that we can learn and reflect upon what adult educators are doing. So we are stressing, we have been stressing, and the debate on professionalization is still very much centered on the role of higher education institutions that are important, I know, and for this we all work, or most of us work in higher education institutions, and if we don't work at some stage, we will have been involved in this kind of contribution that higher education institutions can give. But of course, there are other places of learning and reflecting about what are adult educators and what they are doing. And this is, well, some authors have called the communities of practices. So I see higher education institutions very much or more engaged than other institutions in this debate of professionalization, but I tend to see not so much other contexts for reflecting about what adult educators are and what they are doing, such as this context in which adult educators can have an important role. I'm not talking about the traditional professional organizations, such like the doctors have or the engineers do, but at least places that can be established by adult educators themselves to think about what they are doing and how they are doing, how they are seen and how do they see themselves, what's going on in terms of digitalization and all of these issues that can be relevant. Yep. And maybe this thing maybe is very much related to something that I thought it was something very important for Portugal and not so important for Germany. But after joining the Adult Education Academy for some years now, and after doing these field visits that we usually do on the first week on Wednesdays, I realized that the working conditions of adult educators in Portugal are not very good ones. So we have a few that are full-time employed, and we have a large number that are part-timers or freelancers or even volunteers. And it is also the case, maybe not just like it is here, a better situation, but it is also the case of many field visits that we have done in Germany. So I've seen also many adult educators that were doing other things for the living and then working as well with adult education. And of course, it's not bad. It's well, people do what they have to do. But sometimes I think that with these working conditions, it's difficult to think deeply about who we are and what we are doing. And this is important if we, for instance, if we read the European Union documents about the quality of adult learning and education and the quality of work of adult learning staff. And this is a kind of a topic that it is not really approached by European Union, and there are some programs, funding opportunities within these programs from the European Union, and still there is this way of keeping adult educators as freelancers or as part-timers. So maybe from all the institutions involved in this professionalization process, maybe higher education institutions have done an important part of the job. There is plenty of things that can be done, but if we look at the working conditions of adult educators, we still have a long way to go. I'm not blaming the employers, that's not the point, but I'm saying that if we still keep on having people working as freelancers or part-timers, I don't know if this debate on professionalization will go very far in what concerns reflecting about what they are doing and how they are doing and how do they see themselves and how the others are looking at themselves. Because it's people do something else and then they do also adult education. So,
yeah. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Paula. I do agree with you. Aleksandra, please.
Yes, I couldn't agree more with Paula, and that's absolutely something that we also hear from our members elsewhere. And I think what's still inspiring in the sector is the fact that you do see a lot of adult learning organizations also taking grassroots initiatives to support their adult educators, or adult educators taking that initiative themselves. So these might be very small groups. I think we often heard during the beginning of, yes, very proactive, because it corresponds to a real need sometimes. And I think the COVID-19 pandemic is the perfect illustration of that. So people finding themselves in a very difficult position and reaching out to each other for help through a WhatsApp group, for example. So it can be as informal as that. I think it's also with that, that's maybe coming back to that earlier reflection about how the curricula that we teach in higher education institutions, but also in adult learning, in the adult learning sector, may not always correspond to the reality, because that reality is changing very quickly. And I think that's something that is finally being addressed. So we see that with the new European skills agenda, but also there is a discussion of adding the new pillar of learning of UNESCO to add to the four existing ones that learn to change.
And also here, I just shared the this draft document that was out, this declaration, where there is the point 6 to discuss professionalization, professional development of adult. Yeah, you are very right. It is a currently very much represented topic as one mosaic of the mainstream dialogue of how and what to develop. Yes. I do agree. Thank you very much. And Elisa, please.
Yes, thank you very much. So I will come back to the question of the role of universities with respect to professionalization.
Please.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, sorry. So I think that was, for me, a very important point as I look at professionalization and the role of university learning and was in focus. And I totally agree that there are so many ways to learn today. So, but I think you have to refocus. So what can the role of the university be? Like, what's the curriculum? What's the special idea behind the university learning? And I do agree that universities tend to be not to be flexible or unflexible and always do old things. So, but I think it's just an inspiration, but I'm really interested in researching on the question of how much theory is really necessary. So how much abstract input do you need to reflect on, to develop further? So that's actually the theoretical and methodological approach that university learning has, as you know, like say scientific writing and developing arguments and researching and also
quite probably interdisciplinary positions as well.
Yeah, correctly. Yeah, that's correct. So you learn about topics you've never heard before, and why do we need to elaborate on anthropological questions in philosophy or something? Like, I don't need it, but maybe you will need one day, or maybe it helps you to reflect your own role. So I think yeah, you have to critically also reflect the role of higher education, of the curriculum, and what is really special about it in contrast to other ways of learning, as you can say on YouTube, maybe also in shorter vocational trainings. And I think that for me is an important question. And I also would say that, yeah, the distance between theory and practice to some extent can also be very, yeah, inspiring. So you have time to reflect, and maybe you have time to be irritated and say, I don't need it. It's so strange, it's so abstract. But if you're thinking about more and more, maybe you see some connections. And so not all knowledge you have to teach and learn must be directly practical in some way, but maybe there are other ways at which, yeah, you have developments.
Thank you very much interesting. Let me just roll on this things, and I would like to give the floor to Clara, and while doing this, let me just emphasize that there is also the topic of what is legitimate, what is important in adult education. And I do agree with John that this is also something to highlight about what skills to develop. We also have the arguments about what makes priorities, and it is not just the labor market, it's not just employment. A British slogan was saying that learning is for life and not just for jobs. So, for example, I think higher educations also have a kind of myth to emphasize that learning is much broader as an activity, and just to prepare people to be good at jobs, but also to become a good human being, reflective, critical, responsive to the society, and to change and to make use of change, not to suffer change as much as possible. So it is very much important. Clara, please.
Thank you very much, and I'm really glad to be here with you today. I just recently joined the DG Employment and Skills Agenda Unit. Before that, I was working for many years in the higher education unit of the Commission, so I have some understanding of both topics now, and I think there is a lot of work which we can do together, and I think indeed the Erasmus program can support you as organizations for doing projects. And as Brikena also mentioned, on the bigger scale, the recovery and resilience facility, as well as ESF Plus, are there at national level. There, the difficulty is that it is the decision of the governments. Normally, they should consult stakeholders, but we know that it is not always as wide as we would like to. But in principle, there is a lot of funding from European sources available, and even if the resilience plans are underway and the ESF planning is underway, it is still not impossible to program and receive funding for adult education, and I think you can lobby at national level, and the organizations at European level can support you in that. So I would just like to recall that, and then also the new political attention to adult learning is something which is very important to mention. As you all know, there is a new target by 2030 for adult education to have 60% of adults following training within 1 year, and this is currently we are below 40%, and this increase will need a lot of systemic changes also in the education and training landscape. The Commission is coming soon with 3 initiatives which can be of importance here. I am personally working on the initiative, the Council recommendation proposal on individual learning accounts, which would provide funding, or which would suggest governments to put in place such schemes, and to support the individuals, to help the individuals also to take up training. Then there is an upcoming Council recommendation, both normally still in December, on micro-credentials. And the micro-credentials would support also the recognition of training and help the quality, support the availability of quality assured and recognized training possibilities at all levels of education and training. And this would require changes to national qualifications frameworks to allow this type of provision to be there. And together with the individual learning accounts, people would hopefully be encouraged to take up more training, and hopefully institutions will be also encouraged, higher education institutions, to offer such shorter training, education and training opportunities. And also early next year, the Commission will propose or will publish a strategy, a European strategy for universities, where continuous learning will also be included as one of the topics, also to support the implementation of the micro-credentials initiative. And here, also the outreach to society, community engagement will also be most probably a topic which will be very prominent. So I think there are opportunities for universities to think about it, but also at system level this will require change, because the fund, if you just look at funding, universities usually get the funding based on full-time students and not so much on continuous learning, and those are more full costing for the participants. And yes, could there be changes in that? Would some changes in this kind of funding formula be supportive to spread more upskilling and reskilling opportunities provided by universities? And these kind of questions will need to be raised, and it has, this discussion has already started. Among others, we were working together with with OECD on 2 publications on micro-credentials, which were published beginning of October or end of September, and with this entire topic, recognition, validation or recognition of prior learning, and guidance come also into play, because if people are expected to train so much more, then all these aspects, especially guidance, will have to improve and will have to be much more easily to reach for learners. And finally, oh yes, and I forgot to mention Europass and the digital credentials initiative, which is also there, and it just had a launch event last week, which is there to support all these developments. And we will also start a new phase of the working group on adult learning, where there is room for discussion on also on the role of educators and their status, etc. So we have a lot of opportunities to continue discussions, and we will also work together with this working group, but also one of the actions of the skills agenda is the skills for life, and here we would like to come with some proposal to further thinking, and also jointly with some concrete tangible activities which could be pursued. So I think there is indeed a lot of possibility to work, and your role is really crucial to reach out also to within your institution, and within the different players at national level, and then join forces at European level. Join forces also with us to see how we could improve the current situation.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Clara. I think it is also a good signal that we need to reconfigure who are our potential partners, and what frames we can work in local regional environments. And I think learning communities and learning cities may provide a good ground, like to follow Joan, to indicate that we may not necessarily use the same terms and the same silos for knowledge transfers. We may want to create some new ways of how to get together those who are profoundly good and show up good capacities of generating learning. Like, for example, museums, communities of action in a number of even workplaces, how to work together with those. If you have a good look, for example, the example of the city of Espoo in Finland, this is very great how a learning city is very much oriented to the learners, the community, and get legitimation through knowledge sharing to formulate urban environment, livable place. This is something very much interesting. So we have not so much big time left, but if there would be some comment or reflection on potential stakeholders, who should we work together with to develop and pursue professionalization and professional developments? Are there any new actors? Are there any actors which are relatively unusual? I know that life is changing, even the role and place and recognition of higher education as an actor is changing dramatically, not just real, physical, but also virtual realities are turning in. But I'm also concerned about the thing is that together we have a huge constraint how to make these skills that was just mentioned right now regarding skills for life, that we need to develop healthy and societies to show up well-being in a number of perspectives. Aleksandra, please.
Yes, so coming back to this, and also what Clara was saying about skills for life, that's also something that that we really appreciated, having done a lot of advocacy work on the European level to have that included. So I linked earlier the results of our project, Life Skills for Europe, but also what you just said, Balázs, about working with learning cities and I think strengthening this local and regional approach networks on that level, because I think for adult educators and for adult learners, it's a field that's very context bound, and we are currently working on a project called Regale, which is about regional networks in adult learning, and if you look at the diversity of partners, so it's municipalities, it's adult learning providers, and also universities, higher education institutions. I think that shows that the potential for cooperation is there, and that cooperation is really needed to actually, for example, look at professionalization and what it means, and what are actually life skills in our contexts. Coming back to that.
Thank you very much. I think the example what Regina and Vanessa Boy from Würzburg has shown that
exactly.
I think even universities can provide good collaboration amongst each other, and to attain interest from practitioners to get discipline-oriented, research-based focus to analyze realities and to address good questions with more wider legitimation on the basis of working together with stakeholders like EAE, Lifelong Learning Platform, DVV International, and others through several activities, like, for example, what we have also done in the policy talk. So I would like to thank you very much for your contribution. Thank you very much for your input. May I ask the floor if there is anything that we should add, that we may have missed, or any comment from the colleagues or people who would like to just have a reflection overall in general to the topic that we have provided for this week. Well, if Paula, please.
No, just like to say that this is maybe it could be seen as an old topic, but I think it's a very important one. So I'm very pleased that, Balázs, you brought this issue for discussion because it's an important one.
We also think that there's the opportunity for, through UCAN to formulate some good reflective thoughts and critical inputs into our journal. So if there are any people from this platform or colleagues in your own organizations who would like to share with us some good reflections on aspects, choices and limitations of professionalization, role of higher education, you're very welcome. And I think it is very, very important what Clara highlighted, that there is a certain level of responsibility and need for universities to formulate this the world of action. And I think it is important to formulate, to develop, not to deform and provide fragmentations, but also to provide bridges in between different sectors of education, in between the world of work and social, cultural, intergenerational, and environmental. So let me thank you for your participation. Thank you, Clara, on behalf of the Commission to follow our discourse. Thank you very much indeed. And may I thank for the whole week my colleagues at UCAN office who organized this particular event. And finally, may I thank you for the colleagues in Würzburg, also to Paula, Carmel, and also Elisa for your own inputs through the presentations. Thank you very much indeed. And I would like to say goodbye to you now. Thank you very much. Have a nice weekend.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Goodbye.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye for now.